Hey everybody, what's going on? It's Taliz here, and welcome to the Overwatch Workshop tutorial series 101, starting with the first and hopefully what will be a long line of Overwatch tutorials. When the workshop came out, I noticed that there's a lot of really cool features here, and as someone who has some programming background, I thought this would be pretty straightforward for those of us who knows what's going on and how to program and how the things work, that we'd be able to jump in and do a lot of really cool things. And that's been happening in the community. But unfortunately, I've also noticed that Blizzard's not really been forthcoming with exactly how things go in the documentation realm. So there's, first and foremost, a couple things I'll link in the description below that you guys should know about. But the process of the community's understanding here has been a lot of trial and error, lots of learning, and as we put all this information together as a community, we're starting to learn how to do more and more. And some of you may have seen some custom game modes out there. They're really stretching the bounds of this tool. I can't thank Blizzard enough for putting out this tool. This is fantastic. This has revitalized this game in my mind. I'm finding myself doing a lot more tinkering, ooh I wonder if type things in the game, and I've really been able to do some cool stuff. And so I said, it would be great if someone put together a nice little series of how-tos and tutorials and explain the workshop for those out there who maybe haven't had their chance to get their fingers and into the code and see what they can do and come up with these really great ideas. So that's what this series is. So beginning with this one, I'm going to invite you to join me for a collection of series. I'm going to go through each of the different pieces of the workshop, things that I had to sort of learn on my own, hopefully kind of explain what's going on, teach you a little bit about what I've learned about how things are actually working, and maybe help everybody get a little bit smarter in this really, really cool tool that Blizzard has introduced. So with all that being said, let me start right here at the beginning, creating a new game. All of the custom game stuff that's been out there for quite some time now is still present in the workshop. If you click on the settings button though, you'll notice this new button, and what this actually does is brings you into a code screen. Now, when you come into this screen for the first time, this doesn't really tell you what's going on, so it's pretty important to understand what this screen does and how this screen is different than what these screens do. So everything that I'm able to do here has always been available here, these turn-ons, turn-offs. This allows me to do all these custom game elements, but all of these elements, if you think about what they're actually doing, they're affecting this character at all times in my custom game. There's no element where sometimes it's a certain value and sometimes it's another value based on what's going on. Well, that's what the workshop allows me to do. The workshop allows me to create a series of what they call rules, and the rules are basically looking for certain events to happen. When those events happen, they check the condition of some things. If this is true, if this is false, if this is above a number, below a number, certain elements have occurred in the way that you want them to. It allows you to do some specific actions. Those actions could be changing out heroes, changing damage, changing gravity, even creating some visual components on the screen, all of which we'll go into as we get into the future lessons. But let's just look at that for a second. So any rule that I add, and this is the core of the component of the workshop, it's going to be added here in this structure. There's an event. There's some sort of a condition. When that event occurs, it's going to check the conditions. If the conditions are found to be true or false based on how I build them, it's then going to execute one or more actions. Now, there's some upper limitations to how many of each of these you can put in here. I want to say it's somewhere in the neighborhood of 30 or so. But right now, you can get pretty creative with what you're trying to do in the action side. It doesn't really require as much on the condition side. You can create as many rules, I think, as you want. I have a game mode that goes up to about 100 different rules. And inside of that, you can get pretty deep into the core of the game itself and really revitalize the way the system works from the ground up to see your vision come true. So let me talk about what these events are. So these events are really critical, and they're really the core of what's going on. You have to say when something happens, when I'm trying to build a workshop rule, what in the system that has occurred is going to tell me I need to potentially do some work. Is it something ongoing? Meaning that I'm always checking this condition in a global manner. I'm not looking at anything specific to a player. I'm just always looking for this condition to occur. Is it something that I'm always looking for one or more players? I'm looking at certain players on certain teams, everyone on the team, a certain character that's been selected, for example. Is it something that happens when a player earns an elimination? Is it something when a player earns the final blow as part of that elimination? When any player takes a damage? When they deal the damage, I got those backwards, dealing the damage, taking the damage, or when they actually died. And let's say I'm looking for each player. As you can see, I can specify team, I can specify player by location, I can specify by name as well. And unfortunately in this drop down, they're not in order. It seems to be in the order they were added to the actual game. That's just a fun little bug. Hopefully Blizzard will fix that later. But when this is true, I can then add conditions. Now, in the future, we're going to go through a lot of what these conditions mean. I'm going to talk about the ones that are pretty meaningful to get some quick basic changes into the workshop and start creating your own modes. But as you can see, there's an awful lot of options here, some of which are explained, some of which are not explained. Again, in the description below, I'm going to link to the Wikipedia page that's been started by the community to document a lot of what those features do and how they actually work, and I think that's a great resource for all of you. But let's say, for example, I'm going to look for some conditions to say, is alive. So is the player alive? And these are conditions that would say, I'm going to ongoingly check for every single player across all teams, regardless of the player, if they're alive. And if that's a true scenario, then I'm going to perform an action. And you can create multiple actions here. You can do variables, which I'm going to talk about in the next video, or you can actually get into, again, a long list of things that you want to do. That allows you to really get specific, and then we can talk about, as we get into some of the specifics of the particular types of actions in future videos, what you want it to do, and how you would get there. So in this case, I'm going to choose kill the event player, and nobody killed them in particular. I just wanted them to die. So now what this rule allows me to do, very simplistically, is saying every time that I run this rule, every time the system's in the background is checking for every rule, it's going to say this is ongoing for all players. So each individual player, this rule is going to be checked to see if that player is alive. If they are, it's going to kill them. So in effect, this is a death rule. And so I would want to, if I'm a good coder, call it the same thing, call it the death rule. That way I know in the future what this means. Now when I back out of that, I'm actually going to save that to the workshop. That's great. I'm starting to build my rules here, and as I go through and I'm going to build more and more complex rules, longer and longer, I'm going to want to make sure that those rules are available to me in the future. I'm going to do a couple things though before I save it. First, I'm going to give it a description. And when you right click on any custom game, you know that nice little description that pops up? That's where this goes. You would say this is the long description of what this does. And this description will then populate to the actual game itself. So you can see here from the right click, right now there's nothing. Give it a second to refresh, and there you go. That's where this goes. It tells me what's going on. Then I can say I'm going to save all my changes. Now saving here into a preset allows me to save the changes into a preset. So in the future, when you create another game, you can just simply go into this presets and select your changes. And they all have a nice name that you give them. You can call them anything you want. You can create a new one, or you can drop down and say you have others. As you can see, I have a lot of different PvE modes I'm currently working with right now. You can utilize this import code button. When you pull codes, and I can put some codes out there, put some links, some really good codes as well. And if you haven't, for example, discovered who Darwin is, he's a great contributor. You should go look at his information, his streams, and he's got some codes out there you can play with as well. But this allows you to push a button, type in the magic code, and when you type in that magic code, it pulls in all the settings from whatever that mode is that someone's already saved. How do you create your own codes? Well, you click on the share code button. What that allows the system to do is create a code for you, and it'll give you just this code number. Now this code, obviously you wouldn't want to put in because there's nothing going on, but that's what this is. This is 06WE4 becomes the code that when you place in here, we'll import all of the details. Now one thing that's important to note, anything that we're going to do in the workshop is not going to adjust this screen. So if your mode requires AI players, if your mode requires specific players in specific spots, specific players to be created at specific difficulty levels, all of that will need to be recreated each time you import the code. It does not automatically build itself out. So for my PvE mode, for example, I'm going to always have to swap myself over to the red team. This is where the actual players are, and over here is where I load AI. So each time I load that mode, I'm going to have to be able to fill this out accordingly. So let me show you what I mean by that. So I'm going to go to my presets. It's going to pull the presets from the system. I'm going to load my most current version of the P. It's going to tell me right here it's going to override. I'm going to say that's okay. And look, boom, here's all my configurations. Nice. Changed all my heroes accordingly. You can see the adjustments I've made to the heroes. Got all my maps, got all my mode information set up just like a custom game normally does. And it's got all the information in my workshop codes. So when I go here, you can see all the different rules I've been building. Now, the important part is the part that I've talked about though. None of this is populated. So if I were to simply load the code that was given to you to get to my PvE mode, then you'll see right here that it doesn't load this and it doesn't set the name. At least it doesn't currently. In the future it may, but there you go. So the short version here is that's how you get to the workshop. That's what the toolkit looks like. That's how you move around. It's just a quick view of what the workshop's going to be. As we move into future lessons, I'm going to try to keep these to 10 minutes or so. We'll go into our next lesson to talk about some of the features that you'll actually need to utilize to do things in the system, how we can manipulate some of the base components, how we can do certain basic things, and we'll move more and more advanced as we move along. If you guys find this useful, if you like it, please press the like button. Let me know. Leave some comments below. If you find it not as useful, you want me to go faster, slower, you'd like to certain things that you'd like for me to go over, what have you, let me know that as well. Appreciate it again, guys, and thanks for joining.